The Velithari Dominion had spent 300 years conquering every species they encountered in the Orion arm of the galaxy. Their fleet was massive, containing over 12,000 warships of various sizes and classes. They had never lost a war. They had never retreated from a battle. Every species that stood against them was either destroyed completely or forced into slavery. Grand Admiral Zorith stood on the observation deck of his flagship, a massive vessel called the Eternal Sovereign. Through the reinforced windows, he watched a small blue planet grow larger as his fleet approached. The planet was called Earth. It was home to a young species known as humans. The Velithari had been watching humanity for several decades. Their scouts had studied human colonies, counted their ships, and analyzed their military strength. The reports were not impressive. Humans had only been traveling between stars for about a century. They had established 14 small colonies on various worlds, and their entire military fleet consisted of roughly 200 vessels. Most of these ships were old, poorly armed, and no match for Velithari technology. Zoroth had expected the conquest to be simple, and he was not disappointed. The war began when Velithari warships attacked the outer human colonies without warning. The first to fall was a mining world called New Montana, where 3 million humans worked extracting valuable minerals from the planet's crust. The colony's defense force consisted of 12 small patrol ships. They were destroyed in less than an hour. News of the attack spread quickly through human space. Their governments tried to organize a response, but they were too slow and too divided. While politicians argued about strategy and resources, the Velithari fleet continued its advance. Captain Daniel Morris commanded a heavy cruiser called the Intrepid. He was 43 years old, with gray hair at his temples and deep lines around his eyes. He had served in the human navy for 20 years, and he had never seen anything like the Velithari Armada. When he received orders to defend the colony of New Geneva, he knew it was a suicide mission. The battle for New Geneva lasted 6 hours. Captain Morris and his crew fought with everything they had. They destroyed 11 enemy vessels before the Intrepid was finally overwhelmed. As his ship broke apart around him, Morris sent one final message to Fleet Command. He told them that the enemy was too strong, that conventional tactics would not work, and that humanity needed to find another way to fight. His message was received, but no one knew what to do with it. Admiral Catherine Shaw commanded the 3rd Colonial Fleet, which was the largest human military force in existence. She was a stern woman in her late 50s, with silver hair cut short and a reputation for never backing down from a fight. When she received orders to make a final stand at Jupiter, she gathered her captains and told them the truth. They could not win this battle. The enemy had too many ships, too much firepower and technology that was centuries ahead of anything humans possessed. But they would fight anyway because running was not an option. They would buy time for civilian evacuations. They would make the enemy pay for every kilometer of space they took. The Battle of Jupiter is the largest engagement in human history. Admiral Shaw commanded 47 warships against a Velithari force of over 2,000. The battle lasted 3 days. Human ships used every trick they could think of. They hid in the radiation belts of Jupiter's moons. They launched surprise attacks from the cover of asteroid fields. They rammed enemy vessels when their weapons failed. Every human captain knew they were going to die, but they refused to die quietly. Admiral Shaw's flagship was destroyed on the 3rd day. Her final transmission was a simple message to the people of Earth. She told them that she was sorry she could not do more, and that she hoped they would find a way to survive. After Jupiter fell, there was nothing left to stop the Velithari advance. The orbital defense grid around Earth was the last line of defense. It consisted of hundreds of weapon platforms, missile batteries, and automated defense drones. The system had been designed to protect humanity's homeworld. From any threat, it lasted for hours. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Price was 28 years old. He commanded a destroyer called the Resolute, which was the last human warship still fighting. His crew had been awake for 3 days straight, running on stimulants and desperation. Their ship was damaged, their weapons were nearly depleted, and they were surrounded by enemy vessels. Price had received orders to retreat, to save his ship and crew for some future battle. He had ignored those orders. There would be no future battles if Earth fell. And he refused to abandon the civilian transports that were still trying to escape the planet. The Resolute destroyed 2 enemy cruisers before it was finally overwhelmed. Price's last act was to ram his crippled ship into a Velithari carrier. Taking the massive vessel with him from the surface of Earth, survivors watched the sky burn. The lights of dying ships sparkled like terrible stars, each one marking the death of brave men and women who had given everything to protect their home. Grant, Admiral Zorath, ordered his fleet into formation around the conquered planet. His ships formed a perfect sphere surrounding Earth on all sides. There was no escape, no hope of rescue, no chance of resistance. The war had lasted 11 days. Zorath stood on his observation deck and looked down at the blue world below. He felt no sympathy for the defeated species. They had fought well, he admitted, but fighting well meant nothing against superior numbers and technology. The strong conquered the weak. This was the natural order of the universe. He ordered his communications officer to broadcast a message to the surviving humans. The message was simple. They had been conquered. They would submit to Velithari rule. Any resistance would be met with total destruction. Then he ordered the celebration to begin across the Velithari fleet. War drums thundered. Soldiers cheered and raised their weapons in triumph. Officers toasted each other with expensive drinks from conquered worlds. Musicians played ancient songs of victory while dancers performed traditional celebrations. The sound was broadcast to Earth on all frequencies, so the defeated humans could hear their conquerors rejoicing in the ruins of cities around the world. Survivors huddled in shelters and listened to the alien celebration. Many wept, some prayed. Others simply sat in silence, trying to understand how their world had changed so completely in less than 2 weeks. The Velithari believed the war was over. They believed humanity was broken, defeated, and ready for subjugation. They began making plans for occupation, for resource extraction, for the integration of human labor into their empire. They did not know about the signal that was already traveling through the darkness of space, heading toward a place no Velithari scanner had ever detected. They did not know about the secret that humanity had been keeping for 40 years. The war was not over. It was just beginning, Ambassador. Ria Valdez had spent her entire career trying to prevent wars. She was 63 years old, with dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that had seen too much suffering. For 30 years, she had traveled between worlds, negotiating treaties, resolving disputes, and building bridges between different cultures and species. Now she stood in the shuttle bay of an alien warship, preparing to negotiate the surrender of her entire species. The shuttle ride from Earth had taken 2 hours. Valdez had spent most of that time reviewing her notes and trying to control her trembling hands. She knew what the Velithari wanted. They wanted complete submission. They wanted humanity to become a slave race, working in their factories and mines, serving their needs without question. Her job was to make that slavery as bearable as possible. Lieutenant Grace Palmer was her communications officer, a young woman of 25 with red hair and freckles across her nose. Palmer had volunteered for this mission when no one else would. She said she wanted to be useful, to do something that mattered. Valdez admired her courage, even as she worried about what the young woman would witness. The Eternal Sovereign was the largest ship Valdez had ever seen. Its corridors stretched 4 kilometers, lined with strange artwork and the preserved remains of conquered species. Velithari soldiers watched them pass with cold, reptilian eyes. Their scales were dark green, almost black, and their faces showed no expression that humans could read. Grand Admiral Zorath received them in his war chamber, a massive room filled with trophies from 100 conquered worlds. He sat on a throne made from the bones of some enormous creature, surrounded by his senior commanders. When Valdez entered, he did not stand. Through his translator device, his voice emerged as a deep, mechanical drone. "You are the human ambassador. You have come to discuss terms." "I have come to negotiate the conditions of our surrender," Valdez replied, keeping her voice steady. "We understand that we cannot defeat your forces. We ask only for mercy in how you treat our people." Zorath made a sound that his translator rendered as laughter. Mercy is not a concept we practice human. You will serve the Dominion. Your industry will produce goods for our empire. Your young will labor in our work camps. Your governments will be dissolved and replaced with our administrators. We accept these conditions, Valdez said, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. But we request certain accommodations. We ask that families not be separated. We ask that children under 16 not be conscripted for labor. We ask that our religious practices be tolerated. The negotiation lasted 6 hours. Zorath seemed to enjoy watching Valdez beg for small mercies. He granted some requests and denied others, apparently at random. Families would remain together, he agreed, but only if they proved useful. Children would not work in the harshest conditions, but they would still work. Religion would be tolerated as long as it did not interfere with productivity. These were small victories, meaningless in the face of total defeat. But Valdez fought for each one as if the fate of humanity depended on it, because in a way, it did. Every small mercy was a chance for her people to survive, to endure, to wait for better days. When the negotiations finally ended, Valdez was exhausted. Her voice was hoarse from talking, and her legs ached from standing for so long. The surrender documents were transmitted to Earth, where the surviving governments would have no choice but to accept them. As she prepared to return to the shuttle, Lieutenant Palmer touched her arm. The young woman's face was pale, and her hands were shaking. Ambassador Palmer whispered, "I intercepted something." "A transmission from the outer solar system," Valdez frowned. "What kind of transmission?" "It was encoded using a cipher I have never seen before. The Velithari did not detect it. Their sensors are not calibrated for this frequency." "What did it say?" Palmer handed her a small datapad. On the screen were 3 words, and a temment. Protocol activated. The timestamp was dated 40 years ago. Valdez stared at the screen, her exhaustion forgotten. She had never heard of the Prometheus protocol. It was not in any database she had access to. The timestamp made no sense. How could something be activated 40 years ago? "What does it mean?" Palmer asked. "I do not know," Valdez admitted. "But I think we should not mention this to anyone until we understand it better." They returned to Earth in silence, both of them thinking about those 3 mysterious words. The shuttle passed through the Velithari blockade without incident. Landing at what remained of the Geneva spaceport, the city was in ruins. Velithari bombardment had destroyed most of the historic buildings, leaving only rubble and ash. Survivors wandered through the streets, searching for food and shelter. Occupation forces were already establishing checkpoints and registering the local population. Valdez spent the next 3 days trying to learn more about the Prometheus protocol. She contacted every government official she could find, every military commander, every intelligence officer. No one had heard of it. No one knew what it meant. She was about to give up when she received a message from an old colleague, a retired general named Victor Hayes. Hayes had served in military intelligence before the war, and he had connections that few others possessed. The message was short. Stop asking questions. Trust that some secrets are kept for good reasons. Wait. Valdez did not like waiting. She had spent her entire career taking action, solving problems, making things happen. But something in the general's message made her pause. He knew something. He could not or would not tell her what it was. But he knew. She decided to trust him. On the surface of Earth, life under Velithari occupation began. Humans were assigned to work details, sorted by age and health and skill. Families were moved to new housing blocks, cramped apartments where dozens of people shared small spaces. Food was rationed. Movement was restricted. The old freedoms that humans had taken for granted disappeared overnight. But in the darkness of space, far beyond the reach of Velithari sensors, something was moving. 97 ships, hidden for 40 years, were finally awakening. Their crews, men and women who had sacrificed everything for this moment, were preparing for the mission they had trained their entire lives to perform. The Velithari celebrated their victory, unaware that the true battle had not yet begun. Ambassador Valdez looked up at the night sky, now filled with the lights of enemy warships, and wondered what secrets humanity had been keeping from itself. She did not know about the Shadow Fleet. She did not know about the thousands of volunteers who had given up their families, their identities, and their lives to serve in absolute secrecy. But she would learn soon. Everyone would learn in the year 2089. Humanity detected something terrifying in the depths of space. Long-range sensors picked up signals from the Velethari Dominion, a vast empire that was expanding toward the Orion arm of the galaxy. The signals showed a civilization that had conquered hundreds of species across thousands of years. They showed a military force that no known power could resist. The leaders of Earth realized that contact with the Velethari was not a question of if, but when. And when that contact came, humanity would face a choice between submission and extinction. A secret meeting was held in a bunker beneath the Swiss Alps. Representatives from every major government attended, along with the heads of the largest defense contractors and a handful of retired military officers. The meeting lasted 3 days, and when it ended, a decision had been made. Humanity would build a hidden fleet. Admiral Christopher Dunn proposed the plan. He was 72 years old at the time, a veteran of conflicts across human space and a brilliant strategic thinker. His idea was simple but radical. The fleet that humanity showed to the galaxy, the ships that patrolled their colonies and protected their trade routes, would never be their true strength. That fleet would be a decoy, a sacrifice, something to keep enemies focused while the real weapon remained hidden. The Shadow Fleet would be built in secret, crewed by volunteers who would disappear from public life forever. These volunteers would never contact their families again. They would never return to Earth or any human colony. They would live in isolation, training and waiting till the day their services were needed. That day would come only if humanity faced extinction, the Prometheus. Protocol was approved with a unanimous vote. Construction began immediately. Shipyards were carved into rogue asteroids, floating in the empty space between star systems where no one would think to look. Materials were smuggled from mining operations across human space, hidden in legitimate cargo shipments. The best engineers and scientists were recruited under the cover of classified DCEC research programs. The ships they built were unlike anything humanity had produced before. They were called Dreadnoughts, and each one was 3 kilometers long. Their weapons included antimatter torpedoes, gravitational lance arrays, and plasma cannons powerful enough to crack a moon. Their shield systems were based on technology reverse-engineered from a Velethari probe that had crashed on Mars decades earlier. Each dreadnought required a crew of 1,500. Finding those volunteers was the hardest part of the program. Lisa Monroe was 24 years old when she received the invitation. She was a lieutenant in the Naval Academy, top of her class in tactical operations and ship-to-ship combat. One day, a man in civilian clothes approached her after class. He said he represented a special program, something that required absolute dedication and sacrifice. He told her that if she accepted, she would never see her family again. She would be declared dead in a training accident. Her parents would mourn her, and she would never be able to tell them the truth. In exchange, she would serve humanity in a way that no one else could. Lisa asked for one day to think about it. That night, she went home and had dinner with her parents. She memorized their faces, the sound of their voices, the way her mother laughed and her father told bad jokes. She did not tell them what she was about to do the next morning. She accepted. Over the following months, Lisa watched her old life disappear. Her academy records were altered to show she had died in a shuttle malfunction. Her belongings were packed up and sent to her grieving parents. A memorial service was held in her honor, tended by friends and classmates who would never know she was still alive. She was transported to a hidden facility in deep space, where thousands of other volunteers had already gathered. They came from every nation on Earth, every colony in human space. Some were young, like Lisa. Others were experienced officers who had grown tired of fighting wars they could not win. All of them had made the same sacrifice. For 40 years, they trained and waited. Lisa rose through the ranks, becoming first a commander, then a captain, finally a vice admiral. She commanded the flagship of the Shadow Fleet, a massive dreadnought called the Unconquered. Her crew was her family now, The only people who understood what she had given up. They ran simulations every day, practicing battle tactics against imaginary Velithari fleets. They studied enemy ship designs, weapon systems, and command structures. They maintained their vessels in perfect condition, ready to launch at a moment's notice, and they watched from afar as humanity lived its normal life. Unaware of the guardian angels hiding in the darkness, Vice Admiral Monroe was 62 years old when the signal came. She was in her quarters, reviewing training reports, when her executive officer burst through the door. Captain Henry Cole was a large man with a shaved head and a scar across his chin. He had been with Monroe for 20 years, and she had never seen him look so excited. "Admiral," he said, breathing hard, "the Prometheus Protocol has been activated. We have received confirmation from Earth." Rose stood up slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. "Show me." The message was brief. Earth had been conquered. A visible fleet had been destroyed. The Velithari Dominion was celebrating their victory. It was time. Monroe walked to the bridge of the Unconquered, where her senior officers were already assembled. They looked at her with expressions ranging from excitement to fear to grim determination. They had waited their entire adult lives for this moment. "Signal all ships," Monroe said, her voice steady. "Prepare for fold space jump. Destination, Sol System." Across the hidden fleet, 97 dreadnoughts came to life. Engines that had been dormant for years powered up. Weapon systems completed final diagnostics. Crews took their battle stations. Vice Admiral Monroe looked at the star map on her display. Earth was 12 light years away. The fold space jump would take approximately 3 hours. "We have trained for 40 years, she said, addressing her crew. "We have given up everything. Our families think we are dead. Our friends have forgotten us. We have lived in the shadows, waiting for the day when humanity would need us." She paused, looking at each face on her bridge. "That day has come. Today we go home." The Unconquered's engines roared to life, and the ship vanished into fold space, followed by 96 sisters. They were heading toward a battle that would determine the fate of humanity, and the Velithari had no idea they were coming. Grand. Admiral Zorith was enjoying a glass of fermented nectar when the alarm started screaming. He was in his private quarters, relaxing after another day of managing the occupation of Earth. His servants had just brought him a meal of fresh meat from the planet below, a delicacy he was eager to sample. The alarm was a deep, pulsing sound that meant unknown contacts had been detected. Zoroth set down his glass and walked calmly to his personal command console. There was no need to rush. His fleet had 12,000 warships, and there was nothing in this system that could threaten him. Then he saw the sensor readings, and his calm disappeared. 97 massive contacts had emerged from fold space at the edge of the solar system. Each contact was enormous, larger than any ship in the Velithari fleet. They were moving in perfect formation, heading directly toward Earth at high speed. Zorith contacted his bridge immediately. "Report. What are those vessels?" His sensor officer sounded confused and frightened. "Admiral, we do not know. They match nothing in our databases. The hull signatures are human, but the scale is impossible. Each vessel is approximately 3 kilometers in length. That is impossible. The humans had no ships of that size." "Yes, Admiral. And yet there they are." Zorith stared at the display, trying to understand what he was seeing. The human fleet had been destroyed. He had watched it happen. Their shipyards had been captured and searched. There had been no sign of any vessels like these. Where had they come from? Vice Admiral Lisa Monroe stood on the bridge of the Unconquered as her fleet entered the Sol system. Through the forward view screen, she could see the distant light of Earth's sun. She had not seen that star with her own eyes for 40 years. "All ships report ready for combat," Captain Cole announced from his station. "Weapons charged. Shields at maximum. Crews at battle stations." Monroe nodded. "Open a channel. All frequencies. I want the Velithari to hear this, and I want Earth to hear this." Communications officer made the connection, and Monroe's voice was broadcast across the entire solar system. "This is Vice Admiral Lisa Monroe of the United Earth Shadow Fleet. For 40 years, we have waited in silence. For 40 years, we have prepared for this moment. We are the secret that humanity kept from the galaxy. The weapon that was never meant to be used unless our species faced extinction.
Ow.
She paused, letting her words sink in. To the Velethari Dominion, you have conquered our colonies. You have destroyed our ships. You have occupied our homeworld. But you made one terrible mistake. You assumed that what you saw was everything we had. On Earth, survivors gathered around any working communication device to listen. In the ruins of cities, in underground shelters, in the cramped apartments where the occupation forces had confined them, humans heard the voice of a woman they had never known existed. Ambassador? Mira Valdez stood in the remains of the Geneva spaceport, listening with tears streaming down her face. Beside her, Lieutenant Palmer was gripping her arm so hard it hurt. The Prometheus Protocol, Valdez whispered. This is what it meant. Monroe continued her broadcast. You have 1 hour to withdraw all Velethari forces from the Sol system. Every ship, every soldier, every piece of equipment. If a single vessel remains after that hour expires, we will show you why humanity built these ships. Grand Admiral Zorath listened to the humans' ultimatum with growing rage. He did not know where these ships had come from, but he refused to be intimidated by what he considered a desperate bluff. 97 vessels against 12,000? The mathematics were clear. He ordered his fleet to attack. The first wave of Velethari ships numbered over 3,000. A mix of cruisers, destroyers, and carriers. They advanced toward the Shadow Fleet in a standard attack formation. Confident in their overwhelming numbers, the Unconquered's main weapon was a gravitational lance, a device that created an intense beam of focused gravity. When Monroe gave the order to fire, the lance cut through the Velethari formation like a blade through paper. Ships were crushed, twisted, and torn apart as the beam passed through them in the first 60 seconds. 200 Velethari vessels were destroyed. The Shadow Fleet moved with a coordination that seemed impossible. Each dreadnought covered its neighbors, creating overlapping fields of fire that left no safe approach. Antimatter torpedoes streaked across the battlefield, detonating against Velethari shields and overwhelming them in seconds. Plasma cannons filled the space with deadly light. Captain Cole watched the tactical display update in real time. Enemy losses are mounting rapidly. They are trying to break through our formation, but our shields are holding. Their weapons are not calibrated for our defensive systems. They are using the same tactics that worked against our colonial fleet, Monroe observed. They have not adapted. They have never needed to adapt before. Grand Admiral Zorath watched his fleet die. The display in his command center was filled with red markers indicating destroyed ships. His commanders were screaming for orders, demanding reinforcements, begging for permission to retreat. But Zorath had no orders to give. Nothing in 3 centuries of Velethari military doctrine had prepared them for an enemy like this. The human dreadnoughts were too fast, too heavily armored, and too precisely coordinated. Every tactic the Velethari tried was countered before it could be executed. It was as if the humans knew what they were going to do before they did it, in a way they did. The Shadow Fleet had spent 40 years studying Velethari tactics, analyzing their battles, and developing countermeasures. They knew every formation, every strategy, every weakness. 15 minutes into the battle, 5,000 Velethari ships had been destroyed. The remainder were in full retreat, scattering in all directions as they tried to escape the killing field. Vice Admiral Monroe watched the enemy flee. There was no joy in her expression, only cold determination. Pursue and destroy any vessel that attempts to regroup. I want this fleet eliminated, Admiral Cole said carefully. Some of them may be trying to surrender. Then they should broadcast their surrender on all frequencies and power down their weapons. Any ship that remains armed is a valid target. The battle continued for another 2 minutes. When it was over, the Velethari fleet that had conquered humanity was reduced to scattered debris and a handful of survivors. Grand Admiral Zorath stood alone on the bridge of the Eternal Sovereign. His ship was surrounded by human dreadnoughts, their weapons pointed directly at his command center. His fleet was gone. His victory had turned to ashes. A communication request appeared on his console. He accepted it, and the face of a human woman appeared on his screen. She was older, with gray hair and deep lines around her eyes. Her expression was unreadable. "Grand Admiral Zorath," she said. "I am Vice Admiral Lisa Monroe. Your fleet has been destroyed. Your occupation force is surrounded. You have lost." Zorath stared at her, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. "How?" he asked. "How did you hide this from us?" Monroe's answer was simple. "You studied our colonies. You counted our ships. You analyzed our technology, but you never understood what humans are capable of when we have something worth fighting for." She leaned forward slightly. "We kept this secret for 40 years. Thousands of us gave up our families, our identities, our lives. We disappeared into the darkness and waited, because we knew, someday, someone would make the mistake of thinking humanity was an easy target." Zorath had no response. For the first time in his long career, he had nothing to say. "You will surrender unconditionally," Monroe continued. "You will ease all human prisoners. You will withdraw from our space. And you will tell your Dominion what happened here today." The Grand Admiral bowed his head in defeat. "I accept your terms." The war was over. Humanity had won. The news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Trading vessels carried the story to distant space stations. Refugees from conquered worlds whispered it to each other in secret. Within weeks, every species in the Orion Arm knew what had happened in the Sol system. The Velithari Dominion, the empire that had never been defeated, had been crushed by a young species they had dismissed as primitives. The mighty fleet that had conquered 100 worlds had been reduced to debris in less than 20 minutes. And the weapon that had destroyed them had been hidden in plain sight for 40 years on Earth. The celebrations lasted for days. People poured into the streets of ruined cities, dancing and singing and weeping with joy. The occupation forces had been rounded up and confined to their ships, waiting for transport back to Velithari space. The administrators and overseers who had been preparing to rule humanity were now prisoners themselves. Ambassador Myra Valdez stood in the remains of the Geneva spaceport, watching the Shadow Fleet's dreadnoughts descend through the atmosphere. The massive ships blocked out the sun as they passed overhead, their engines roaring like thunder. She had spent her entire career trying to prevent wars through diplomacy. Now she understood that some things could only be protected through strength. Lieutenant Grace Palmer stood beside her, tears streaming down her face. "I cannot believe it," she whispered. "I cannot believe they were out there the whole time." "Neither can I," Valdez admitted. "And I have been asking questions my entire life." Vice Admiral Lisa Monroe was the last to set foot on Earth. She waited until her ship was fully secured, until her crew had been given shore leave, until every detail of the fleet's transition to peacetime operations had been addressed. Only then did she allow herself to descend to the planet she had left 40 years ago. The shuttle landed in what had once been Washington. The city had been heavily damaged during the Velithari bombardment, but reconstruction had already begun. Cranes rose above the rubble, and the sounds of construction echoed through the streets. A crowd had gathered to welcome her. Thousands of people lined the streets, cheering and waving flags. Monroe walked through them slowly, accepting their thanks with quiet dignity. She did not feel like a hero. She felt like a woman who had done her job, nothing more. The victory celebration was held in a hastily constructed stage in front of the ruined Capitol building. Human leaders from across Earth and the surviving colonies had gathered to honor the Shadow Fleet. Monroe stood at the center of the stage, surrounded by her senior officers and the grateful faces of the people they had saved. A young officer approached her after the speeches ended. His name was Lieutenant Jacob Harris, and he wore the insignia of the Colonial Fleet. His uniform was patched and worn, showing signs of the desperate battles he had survived. "Admiral," he said, saluting. "Permission to speak freely, granted." Harris looked up at the sky where the lights of the Shadow Fleet's dreadnoughts were visible even in daylight. "The Dominion will come back. They will not accept this defeat. They will build more ships, develop new weapons, and return with an even larger force." Monroe nodded slowly. "I know. So what do? We prepare. We rebuild. We make ourselves stronger. She turned to face him, her expression serious. The Shadow Fleet was built because we knew that someday humanity would face an enemy too powerful to defeat with conventional forces. That enemy has been beaten, but others will come. There are always others. Harris considered this. Will we need to hide again? To disappear into the darkness and wait for 40 more years? I hope not. I hope that what happened here today will give us time to build a fleet that does not need to hide. A fleet that can protect humanity openly, without secrets or sacrifices. She paused, a sad smile crossing her face. But if we need to hide again, we will. That is what we do. We endure, we survive. We do whatever is necessary to protect our people. Young lieutenant saluted again. Then I would like to volunteer, Admiral. Whatever comes next, I want to be part of it. Monroe returned his salute. Accepted, Lieutenant. Report to the Unconquered tomorrow morning. We have a lot of work to do. As the celebration continued around her, Monroe walked to the edge of the stage and looked out over the crowd. These were the people she had given up her life to protect. Mothers and fathers, children and elders, workers and artists and scientists. They did not know her name before today. They did not know about the sacrifice she and her crew had made, and in a way, that was right. The Shadow Fleet had never asked for recognition. They had asked only for the chance to serve, to protect, to ensure that humanity would survive no matter what the galaxy threw at them. Her parents had died 20 years ago, never knowing what had happened to their daughter. Her childhood home had been destroyed in the bombardment. The friends she had left behind had grown old and forgotten her. Everything she had sacrificed was gone. But looking at the faces of the people below, she knew it had been worth it. A message arrived on her personal communicator. It was from Ambassador Valdez, requesting a meeting to discuss the terms of the Velithari surrender and the future of human-Velithari relations. Monroe accepted the meeting and began walking toward the designated location. The work of building a new future was just beginning. Months later, the Velithari Dominion sent an official delegation to Earth. They came not as conquerors, but as supplicants, seeking to negotiate a lasting peace. The empire that had never known defeat was now forced to recognize humanity as an equal, a power to be respected rather than exploited. Vice Admiral Monroe attended the negotiations as a military advisor. She sat quietly while diplomats discussed borders and reparations and trade agreements. Occasionally, the Velithari ambassador would glance at her, fear evident in his reptilian eyes. When the treaty was signed, Monroe allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. The Shadow Fleet had done its job. Humanity was safe, at least for now, but she knew that safety was never permanent. The galaxy was vast, filled with dangers that humanity had not yet discovered. The Velithari were just one threat among many. Sooner or later, another enemy would emerge. Another challenge would arise. Another crisis would demand action, and when that happened, humanity would be ready. Monroe stood on the observation deck of the Unconquered, watching Earth turn slowly below. Her fleet was being integrated into the regular human military, its secrets revealed, its crews finally able to contact the families they had left behind. The age of hiding was over, but the age of vigilance was just beginning. She thought about the young lieutenant who had asked to join her crew. She thought about the thousands of volunteers who had given up everything to serve in the Shadow Fleet. She thought about the generations yet to come, who would never know how close humanity had come to extinction, and she smiled, because humanity had proven something today. They had proven that no matter how dark things became, no matter how hopeless the situation seemed, there was always a chance. There was always hope. There was always one more card to play. The Velithari had learned that lesson the hard way. Anyone else who threatened humanity would learn it too.